Hi, so I'm Queiro from Plymouth Marine Laboratory in the UK, and I'm going to give you a quick summary of the efforts that we put into the votes, into understanding whether this huge amount of information that we have out there is actually fit for purpose for the aims that we have for this policy, whether this huge sea of potential indicators will actually help us deliver the aims of achieving good environmental status within the EU. So the DEVO tool was a huge collection, a huge effort in this community to bring together all of these metrics into one resource. And I think, speaking from Ileana, that we have 611 potential indicators in there, in version 7, I think, of DEVO tool. But so there is no shortage of information, but what we don't understand yet is the readiness, the technological readiness of these potential metrics in helping us deliver these aims. So what we wanted to do in this little part of the project was to try to work out whether these metrics actually say, do what they say on the tin, whether these are indeed indicators or just metrics that we have in our community. So that was broken down, that challenge, into two parts. And the first one is about actually understanding what is the quality of an indicator. And as Robert Pirsig put in a very long 400-page essay, quality is extremely dependent on the observer. And that means that although we have a lot of criteria of quality in the literature, these are often depending on who has set out those criteria themselves. And the second part of the challenge was to actually test for them. So can we actually lay out rules to determine whether a specific candidate indicator meets the aims of this policy, is actually an appropriate tool to achieve and monitor good environmental status. So we brought together a large team of ecologists, people with different expertise in different statistical areas, different levels of engagement with policy, and we all met up about 2.5 years ago in Denmark with the aim of finding a way to meet these two challenges, to want to work out what is the quality of these potential indicators and how do you go about testing for them. And so the first part of the challenge was that actually we also don't have any shortage of quality criteria, so these potential attributes of these indicators that might help us to determine whether they are indeed the tools that are fit for purpose for this policy. So we braced ourselves for the amount of information that was already out there, which is great, so we weren't starting from scratch. But what we tried to do was to really unpack these potential lists of quality criteria and work out what were the attributes of these indicators that actually stacked up, the ones that will actually support the policy, from the ones that were a little bit woolly, a little bit subjective, difficult to test, and therefore not potentially good attributes that we wanted for these metrics if they were indeed to support the policy. So we came up, looking at these communal aspirations in our community, we came up with a list of 8, so shortlisted 8 attributes for these criteria, for these indicators, ranging from a number of things which I will not detail here, but covering things from whether things are cost effective, whether they are already in monitoring programs. And 2 of them particularly we felt that were actually the stumbling blocks of the whole quality assessment, which are scientific basis, so whether a metric actually has scientific credibility, whether it's something that the whole community recognizes as something potentially meaningful that we want to measure, and the second one being responsiveness to pressure, because if we don't know how an indicator changes over time, then we don't really know what we're monitoring. So that was the first part. The second part was to come up with a way of testing for this. So do we know when we have 2 candidate indicators whether it is actually doing its job? So is it the Sally Ride of the vessels in oceanography, or is it just something that looks like a vessel but is not really going to take us anywhere? And so what we did was we came up with this sort of Russian dolls approach, whereby for each of the 8 criteria of quality, we came up with a testing methodology to work out whether it actually met that criteria. And that involves steps like stating what data you're using to determine it, what method you are using, how you analyze it, and how you interpret it, and ultimately to score it. And it's through an ambiguous scoring system that we hope we can do this selection. So the next part was to come up with a sort of a user guide for this methodology, and what we did was we tried to apply it to a range of descriptors, a range of assessment areas within the EU, to try to explain to the community how we feel would best fit this quality assessment. So for instance, for criteria 3, which is about responsiveness to pressure, and looking at the presence of keystone kelps and the depth limit of eelgrasses in the Danish coast, we compare them side by side, we apply the methodology, the sort of Russian dolls approach to testing the 8 criteria. And what we found in this case was that for responsiveness to pressure, as well as for another number of criteria, eelgrass, which is on the right-hand column, actually scored a lot better, so actually scored higher in our quality testing than keystone kelp. So in this particular case, eelgrass depth limit was a salicylate, was the indicator that was fit for purpose, whilst keystone kelp was a Belafonte, so something that looked like an indicator, but wasn't really, at present time, able to support the assessment for descriptive 5 in the Danish coast, which is what we were testing. So by having this transparent, objective, and repeatable way of doing this, we are actually able to look at, for instance, whether a particular indicator, which might be more suitable for our area because maybe we've been monitoring it for 20 years, actually requires a little bit more development. So are there weak points in that assessment that we can improve on? Or are there just metrics that are just better than what we've been measuring in the past? And in this way, we hoped to be able to help guide the selection of indicators for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And so the second part of that is that in having this very transparent, objective, and repeatable way of doing this assessment, we can look at across assessment areas, we can look at very different types of indicators, and we can look at the bright spots. So for instance, in Anastina's paper, they used the same list of criteria, and even though they didn't use the same method of assessment, where you have there being the different colors, being the different criteria of quality, it is that you see that once one indicator fails in one criteria, it usually also fails in others. So in this way, we can, having this standardized methodology, we can actually promote knowledge exchange within the EU, within this policy, and have it in a very standardized way, help develop indicators where needs be, and use this sort of very objective scoring to do that. So that was a very quick snapshot, and I'm sorry if I spoke very fast, but if you have any questions, please have a look at the paper, and I'm also around at coffee time. So thanks for your attention.